To me, people advisory is simply giving your client ideas around all things employees.
People advisory to me is making sure that people are seen and heard and they are felt.
Helping our clients manage their employees and manage their business in a way that's going to help them both grow, help their employees grow, and help them grow as a business.
If an advisor goes in and kind of helps someone start thinking about that in a holistic way, it can be a really more intentional strategy for how employers want to define who they are. Like, what is our culture? What matters to us? What do we want to be known for?
They want to have freedom. They want to just build a place that, in our case, we wanted to build the kind of company that we would want to work at.
Now that I've started looking at people advisory in a new and different way, it's helped me grow my practice.
When you start getting involved in that type of work, the relationship with the client goes so much deeper.
Just to dive into certain details that we wouldn't otherwise dive into.
And so they're going to keep coming back and asking more questions. And I think what that naturally leads to is the more confidence we have as firm owners and in a firm, and the more skills we bring up, we're just going to naturally find more service offerings to deliver, right? We're not still out there doing debits and credits the old way we were doing before as accounts. We've moved into lots of other practices.
The impact that I make with my clients is making them feel like they have someone to talk to when it comes to helping them manage and grow their business.
The thing you're offering to them is peace of mind that their people are being taken care of, that it's being done properly, and that it's something that they might be able to take back off of their plate and have it done professionally.
We want to see them succeed. I mean, that's why I'm in this. You know, I want to see them succeed, because if they succeed, I succeed.
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm Will Lopez, along with Caleb Newquist, who can deadlift the heaviest truths. We're live working from home at Gusto, and you are on the margins. Mr. Caleb, 4 months are flying by in 2021. What is happening?
I'm not even paying attention, Will. I don't even notice. It's like, I mean, the April 15th tax deadline is in 2 days, but it's not even the tax deadline. So I don't even, it doesn't even mean anything anymore.
I know. Well, it got extended, so it means even less.
Right. That's what I mean. It's like, it's not even in the April 15th. It's not even like, normally 2 days from now, accountants would be like freaking out. People would be losing their minds, but no, they've got another 30 days. So everything's fine. Yeah. It just doesn't mean as much as it used to. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, it's so good. Well, hey, if you're joining us from LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, thank you so much for joining us live. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our channel on Facebook and join our group on Facebook. or I'm sorry, subscribe to our channel on YouTube and then join our group on Facebook. We'd love to have you join us. If you're watching for the very first time, welcome. Feel free to drop some comments across the 3 platforms. I'll try to find them and call them out. We'd love to have you here. So Caleb, we have a super stacked show for everyone today, huh?
We do. We have a stacked show, so maybe we should get into it.
Well, I was just going to say real quick before we go.
Do you want to talk to me?
I was going to say before we get into it, I'm really excited about this. Like your monologue, of course, the 2 segments. We'll have Jody Padar on the show, CPA, author, just a super powerhouse. And we'll be talking about entrepreneurship. But I'm really curious, after doing a little research about what we're going to talk about, have you gotten like the entrepreneurial itch a little?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and we
because you own your own business, you own your own publication.
Well, I did, that I've left that particular venture behind, but yeah, I've done a couple of things, and Going Concern was one of them, and I had a content studio, a consultancy, and I did that as well, and that's what led to Gusto. So yeah, I mean, I don't have I don't have maybe the most kind of archetypical entrepreneurial experience, but yeah, I've done a couple of different things, taken some risks, and yeah, it's a thing I have some experience with. But so do you, Will Lopez.
Yeah,
you have some experience with starting a business.
Oh, of course. I mean, I'm totally an entrepreneur through and through, right? I just, for me, I was like the kid in the never ending story that was reading the book and totally enthralled. Except I loved the stories that my mom and dad told me growing up of like all the business ventures they had, the high, the good times, the bad times. And I just thought like entrepreneurship was the greatest adventure ever. It was like the place where you could turn dreams into reality. And so doing this segment, I kind of got the little itch a little bit. I'm like, oh
yeah,
I like owning a business.
Think it's an interesting time because I'll talk about this in the monologue a little bit, but we might be on the cusp of something exciting. And so what that actually ends up being is remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. But it's an interesting time, and we're going to talk about this with Jody too. But the future is going to be interesting, even more so than it was maybe, I don't know, 18 months ago.
Totally. All right, well, let's dive into it. Let's go into our first segment, which is a special report with.
All right. This On the Margin special report is about starting a business. You know, that thing you do when you have a wild idea, no other prospects, and you just want to do things your own way? That's what starting a business is, right? Starting a business has become enormously popular during the pandemic. The U.S. Census Bureau, in the partnership with the Federal Reserve and the Universities of Maryland and Notre Dame, put out this quarterly data on business formation statistics. And in the third quarter of 2020, they saw the highest number of new business applications, nearly 1.5 million since they started tracking them in 2004. In January of 2021, just a couple months ago, nearly 500,000 new business applications were filed, with over 100,000 in the retail industry alone. So a lot of e-commerce businesses. The Wall Street Journal reports that most of the e-commerce company Shopify's 1 million customers are first-time entrepreneurs. A lot of this new business creation has been the result of a lot of business failure, however. While the total number of businesses that closed in 2020 is still unknown, Yelp estimated that between April and September of last year, over 160,000 businesses had closed. And UC Santa Cruz estimated it's even higher than that, over 300,000 between February and September. Economists have a term for this, and it's called creative destruction. The idea that economic structure of the US is in this kind of constant state of reinventing itself, with new businesses replacing old businesses. A big downside, however, to creative destruction is that it can lead to big spikes in unemployment, like we saw last year. Countries like Germany have a slightly different approach. They have something called Kurzarbeit, which helps businesses pay their workers in order to keep those workers employed. The program helped keep Germany's unemployment rate low throughout the pandemic, just over 4%, whereas the US, it spiked to over 14%. And if Kurzarbeit sounds kind of familiar, it should. The Paycheck Protection Program that came out of the CARES Act was designed to do something similar. It helped small business employers rather, keep their employees on payroll. PPP is kind of like diet Kurzarbeit. In other words, you're getting a slightly crappier tasting Kurzarbeit. The PPP is a temporary program, but you get it without all the calories, right? So that is, taxpayer funds aren't constantly going to businesses that should probably just fail. So one possible drawback for Germany is that while they maintain these low unemployment rates, that kind of program that they permanently have may prevent new jobs and new businesses from being created. And so, yeah, starting a business can be an exciting and rewarding adventure, and it can contribute to a lot of economic activities. And that's kind of what we've been seeing. But should everyone start a business? And the answer is probably not. It takes a lot of time and hard work and luck to make a successful business. And if you don't have the right idea at the right place in the right time, your business might be doomed before it even starts. But on the other hand, there's the possibility for why we've seen this boom in business starts is that people don't have anything to lose right now. They're stuck inside. They've been stuck inside all this time. They've got an internet connection and not much to do. And so maybe they've had an idea and they figure this is the perfect time to do it. And so where this pandemic business startup boom goes from here is kind of interesting. I mean, will it ease up as the pandemic eases? Or are we kind of at the new beginning, a new wave of entrepreneurship and innovation? And I got to say, I'm kind of excited to see what happens. And that's what I got. Will Lopez on mute.
I fell prey to it. Am I pronouncing this right? Is it Kurzarbeit?
Yeah, I mean, you got the American accent, but but yeah, that's essentially the word. I mean, you got to practice you got to get the German kind of, but yeah, it's Kurzarbeit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. I think it's pretty spot on. And we'll unpack this for everyone. There's definitely a correlation between what we're seeing as far as like the business boom and the entrepreneurship boom, closely tied to this pandemic, right? And sure. A lot of it, of course, very tied to losing your job. And like you got to pay the bills, and so you got to figure something out. But it's been interesting, and I think until we actually started digging into this is when I realized, wow, there is an entrepreneurship spike, which I think the whole time we've been so riddled with the news of just people getting laid off that, the news cycles have just dominated that side of the story. So it's really interesting to see the flip side of like, okay, a lot of people are getting laid off and were laid off, but they're kind of doing something about it.
Yeah. I mean, it remains to be seen, like ultimately how it works for everybody. Right. I mean, if you think about it, with all these businesses starting up, a lot of them will fail in 1 or 2 years, and that's normal. But some pretty fascinating things are going to come out of this. In terms of like, if you think about telehealth, telework, even like streaming services, like we've already seen some of that, right? Where movies aren't even, they're just going straight to streaming services. So what does that mean? Like creative people are going to get, I think the avenue for movies and TV and music, like people have been experimenting with different things. So there's all kinds of interesting things that are going to come out of this. And yeah, so innovation. And so that's pretty cool. But I think ultimately too, is what we'll see is as businesses return to the office, I think some people that started businesses and they realize they can still make a better living, working at Gusto, for example, or wherever the case may be. Because I think always the risk of entrepreneurship is like, getting your own health insurance, making sure you're making enough money to live on. And like you say, that's kind of the trade-off. So you have this high risk, high reward. And I think that's kind of something that's, it's in the US, it's very high risk and very high reward. And the German approach is just like slow and steady, like we'll support you throughout, but we're not going to have like all this kind of disruptive innovation, new job creation and stuff like that. And some of it is cultural, some of it's economic, of course, like that program. We got the link probably in the comments to the show, but there's a good article that kind of goes into the German program, and it's been adopted by other European countries. And it's, it keeps people employed, keeps people getting a paycheck when things are kind of rough. So,
and what's also interesting,
whatever your flavor is.
Yeah, exactly. If we go to the third image here that actually shows the industries and the number of new business applications, it's not just streaming services that are benefiting from all of this. And I think when we were digging into this, and this is from Visual Capitalist using US Census data, look at the top 5, or just this top list, right? Retail trade, how did that happen considering that retail was shut down? And I think you and I were speculating that I think a lot of like Shopify accounts and just online retail locations basically spurred up, right? You got transportation and warehouse, healthcare and social assistance, finance and insurance. And then obviously the ones that you could probably do a little easier, more remotely, professional services. Construction, on the other hand, like that's not remote work, that's showing up. So it's interesting that construction went through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, I think e-commerce, the e-commerce boom makes a lot of sense. And there's, I don't know if we have this article available, but the Shopify, there was a good article in the Wall Street Journal a while back about Shopify. And yeah, Shopify makes it easy for people to start an e-commerce business. So if you, I think one of the people in that story was selling, I think she was knitting hats. She had winter hats. She was making hats for the winter. And so, is that a long-term venture for that person? I don't know. It's difficult to say. I think that's where, like, how we come out of the pandemic and how entrepreneurship looks, or how do people do they expand their businesses? Do they keep pursuing growth, or is this just kind of something that they did as to supplement their kind of transitionary period during the pandemic? Again, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. And but it's an interesting time.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's throw up the slide with all of the US, because what's even more intriguing is this isn't an isolated situation. If we can go to the actual map, there you go. This isn't an isolated situation across certain states or certain areas. It's pretty much all of the United States that business applications have drastically increased from January of last year to January of this year. And then if we go to the regions area, I mean, from when you look at the 4 regions here, like Midwest, Northeast, West, South, I mean, they're double digits in increase, right? From even month over month. I mean, look at this. This is showing numbers from like applications in January 2021, and then the change from the month before. And so I think it just keeps that entrepreneur spirit alive. I mean, of course, here in the States, in America, you can do pretty much whatever you please, and you could start a business on the fly if you wish. So it's just really interesting to see the other side of the silver lining here, where it's like, okay, things are reopening more formally, vaccines out, but along the way, people weren't waiting for those moments. They were like putting their best foot forward, and we're like, we're just going to start a business and roll with it. To try to like offset some income and job loss.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So really, really interesting stuff there. If you guys have any comments, go ahead and shout them below. I love that Joshua said that the entrepreneurship and the never ending story was a great analogy. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think so too. Shout out to you. Also shout out to Sultana. Thank you so much for watching the show. Antonio Martinez. Tony, good to see you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Before we transition over to have Jody join us, if you're new to Gusto and you want to expand your advisory services and offer clients more value, Gusto is the people advisory platform of choice for modern accountants, powered by our people platform. We make it easy for accountants and bookkeepers to onboard, pay, insure, and advise their hardworking clients and teams, especially when it matters most. And better yet, you can become People Advisor certified through the payroll industry's first ever advisory certification program. As a people advisor, you'll learn to combine your financial expertise with people-focused guidance to better serve clients. You'll get great access to great perks to help support your clients and your firm. So partner with Gusto today. Introduce your firm and clients to better people operations and more at gusto.com/get certified. Gusto.com/get certified. Hey, let's welcome the incredible Jody Padar, CPA. She's featured on Accounting Today's Top 100 Influencers in the accounting profession, an author of 2 incredible books, Bot Keepers for Dummies, The Radical CPA, CEO and principal at New Vision CPA Group. Needless to say, she's a badass, and we're glad to have her here. Jody, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Jody, when do you sleep? Like when does the rest? When do you fit in rest?
I just don't. No, it just works, right? So like when you really love what you do, it doesn't matter, right? Like it's not a job, it's just a lifestyle.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I am curious, what was your first brush with entrepreneurship? Like, was it, did you sell Girl Scout cookies? Did you have a lemonade stand? I mean, like, I'm just curious, like, what was your first experience with it?
It wasn't actually till I probably joined my dad and started my firm. I mean, I grew up in a CPA firm, so I grew up having my dad always doing 1040s, which was, I mean, in an entrepreneurial like environment, right? But it wasn't actually until I joined him like 14, 15 years ago that it really, like, I would say I became an entrepreneur and I was selling something. And actually, I should say even prior to that, because I was doing a little bit of work on the side, right? So that was probably like when I first started, right? Like most CPAs, right? I think most CPAs start doing work on the side before they actually decide that they're going to start a firm or do something.
I think that's pretty spot on. I was doing that as well.
So I have to tell you guys a funny story because like you guys are you. So before I joined my dad officially, right? Like I was working for a mid-sized firm and I was doing returns on the side. And my dad actually charged me to use his tax software because that's like what a dad does, right? And so my husband actually used to call him the tax pimp because I had to pay him to use his tax software to do returns and then I got paid for him. And again, we weren't officially partners at that time, but it was kind of funny because even my dad at that time made me pay for supplies, right? Essentially the right to use the professional tax software. So yeah, so that's, I guess, the first time I started.
Hard dad lesson right there.
Absolutely.
Hard dad lesson.
I mean, how did that make you feel to like get charged or something like that? Did you appreciate it fundamentally?
No, I didn't, which is why like my husband coined him that, right? Like my husband's like, why is your dad charging you for software? So basically I had to give him a 30% cut of the return that I did. So if I charged $200 for a return, I had to give him a percentage. So
your dad was an entrepreneur through and through.
I mean, if you consider maybe loan sharking entrepreneurship, that's what it sounds like to me. That sounds like racketeering or something. That doesn't necessarily sound like a fair deal. But hey, you didn't know any better, Jody. So you're just, he was teaching you the ropes.
Absolutely.
So speaking of teaching, okay, so this is a teaching moment. And so that segues nicely into a question that I have. Do you think, Jody Padar, do you think that entrepreneurship is something that can be taught to people? Or do you think it's something that people just either have a knack for and they dive in, they get their hands dirty and they learn it? I mean, can it be realistically passed on to people?
So I don't think that you teach entrepreneurship. I think you have a certain tolerance for risk. And that tolerance allows you to become an entrepreneur or not, right? Like you can do any job, you can learn any skill set, but what you can't do is have a tolerance for risk. And some people just naturally have a tolerance for risk. Some people, like you said before, have no other choice. So that there's no risk taking because they don't have a job, right? And then I think there are some people like who have a tolerance for risk, but may have a supporting system where they don't have to worry about it, right? So they have a spouse who works. So their choice is, they could be an entrepreneur or they could stay at home, right? So like, I think that it's really about tolerance for risk and not necessarily about like being an entrepreneur.
do you think someone could develop a tolerance for more risk in order to get themselves, like, get the entrepreneurial spirit kicked off?
So,
Or do you think it's something like, because
so
to your point, I think entrepreneurship and risk are two things that one really has to work through.
So I think you actually build that muscle of risk, right? So when you first start, like when I first started, I was only worried about myself and making money on the side, right? Then I joined my dad and I had more bills to pay and I had to actually feed myself full time, right? But then as my firm grew, I actually got a bigger tolerance for risk because I had employees I was paying and they were under my care. And so I got that muscle and it developed more, right? And you just get used to it as being part of a true business. And I'm talking about an entrepreneur who actually has employees, not someone who's just like a solopreneur, because there's a big difference when you start having employees under you. And so then what happens is you just get used to having that, I don't want to say weight on your back, but you get used to having people depend on you. And then it just becomes easier. And I think you're okay taking bigger risks, but you also, I'll say, you develop the other side of it where you're like, okay, I can't be so crazy innovative because I have people depending on me. Whereas when you really have no like kind of people depending on you, you could be as crazy as you want and be as innovative as you want because it doesn't matter because you're not worried about feeding their families as well.
So what do you think of what we've been seeing? Like, we went over lots of numbers and, economic trends and what we're seeing. So like lots of business starts are going on. I'm asking you to speculate, so please speculate. But
Get crazy.
how do you see this kind of going forward? Do you feel like this is a lot of people who are, I don't want to say in desperate situations, but are in situations like they don't have anything to lose. So if you build a Shopify site, you start shilling your widgets or whatever it is, and that gets you through this kind of transitionary period to the other side of the pandemic? Or do you think that we're kind of on the cusp of, like, I don't know, kind of an entrepreneurial boom that can potentially last over, a good portion of the decade?
So I think that it started before the pandemic, and I think it started with healthcare, right? So once
Mm-hmm.
we had quote unquote Obamacare or whatever you want to call that, all of a sudden entrepreneurship became a lot more reasonable because healthcare typically was the hardest thing to keep someone in a corporate job, right? Like they didn't have healthcare, they couldn't try something new. So now I think this is just the continuation of that, where some of those businesses will be really successful. Some of the people will be like, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm going to go get another job. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just a continuation of the opportunity to have more small businesses in the US because people like have freedom to do it because the cost of getting started is a lot easier, right? When you look at all the cloud tools, it's way easier to get started doing something. You don't have to worry so much about health insurance anymore because you have an opportunity to purchase it, right? Like before, you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't even have an opportunity to purchase it. So I think it's just that continuation. And I think it's going to be like longer term, right? So let's say the pandemic hopefully will end at some point, and like all these businesses are going to be around, and that's a good thing. I mean, I don't know. Does it matter if you work for corporate or if you have your own business? Is there a stigma there? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I remember when I left the practice I was at, I worked at a conventional practice in Boca. So I'm from South Florida in Boca Raton. And when I left, I remember the balancing of the risk, right? And then also really thinking about the healthcare side of things, right? I was working at a company that was offering me and my family. So I was married with a child at the time. And, you know, it was a serious decision. Like you're tossing yourself into not only personal risk of like putting food on the table, but even health risk if things go south without proper health care. So I think that connection that you just drawn is really, really interesting. Prior to the pandemic, Jody, were you seeing just as much entrepreneurism kind of flourish? Because I mean, you're in it day in and day out. Or do you think the pandemic just kind of threw fuel to the fire because it freed a lot of people to consider entrepreneurship as an avenue?
So I think I think it's probably both because I think entrepreneurship now has this sexiness to it. a lot more sexiness to it than it actually is if you actually are an entrepreneur and you're actually doing it. It's not always as fun as they make it out to be, but I think that it was always there, and I think just the pandemic is just fueling it, right? And who knows what will happen when we get out of the pandemic, but um, I don't know. Small businesses are cool. I like small businesses, and like they really make up the US. Like you don't really realize how many small businesses there are that do things and that are really, really important to the society. And like, why does everything have to be so big corporate?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's an important point, because when you think about like businesses like Amazon, or you think of, I mean, Amazon is a good example, but if you think like the scope of what Amazon does, like it's in all kinds of different businesses now, and they're not the only one. I'm just picking on Amazon, but there's other like big technology companies. The scope of their businesses is growing, and you're right. There is kind of this corporate influence that's kind of, it's just pervasive throughout the country. Like it's everywhere you look, right? And so small business has the ability to build community, to build intimacy within those communities that, I don't know, in my opinion, that big corporations just don't. They don't have the same ability to do that. So I'm with you. Like I hope that small businesses continue to flourish because they are so important to our local communities. And full disclosure, Gusto's business, and but I think, but on a connection level. So what we've been missing throughout the pandemic is all the connection is what people have been missing.
Mhm.
And I think how people congregate in small businesses and restaurants and bars are the most, is an easy example. Like I miss meeting my friends at our local tap house and spending time with them. And I love supporting that small business. And I'm really looking forward to doing that again. And I think I think lots and lots of people share that feeling. And so, yeah.
So the other thing about small business that I don't think a lot of people realize is how many small businesses actually serve the Amazons of the world, and they are contracted services, and Amazon, they're not employees, and they may have 5 people that work for them, but they actually do work for Amazon. So like it's interesting to me again because everyone thinks that small businesses exist outside of the corporate world, but there are a ton of small businesses that actually main clients are these large publicly traded companies, and that's all they
Right.
serve. And yet there are
Right.
specific professional services. Maybe they specialize in education, maybe they specialize in something. And so, like, again, there's a ton of businesses out there that require or need those large businesses for actually them to work as well. So I
Right.
think a lot of people don't know what small business is too, right?
No, that's totally true. Like if you think about manufacturing is like a really good example, especially like historically, like big car manufacturers, a lot of the suppliers to the big car manufacturers, those were small businesses. Like they'd be making bolts, or they'd be making gaskets, or whatever the case, whatever it is that they did, they were a supplier to this mega manufacturer. And so when the car industry went through all its turmoil, I don't know, how long's it been, 10, 15, 20 years ago, like that really had a downstream effect on a lot of small businesses. And we're kind of in the process of trying, again, it's the creative destruction, right? Like we're in the process of building kind of a new era of the car business in the United States. And so that's kind of exciting. And just one of the many areas where there's some innovation and a lot of excitement going on.
Well, I mean, I think too, we're going to be in a renaissance, right? So the pandemic kind of killed everything. Well, it didn't kill everything, but it kind of leveled everything off. So what's the renaissance going to be like? I mean, it's kind of cool when you think about it that way, right?
Right.
What's the
Yeah.
positive?
Yeah, totally. In fact, I remember reading a good piece from Forbes, which was, has COVID-19 transformed the gig economy, to your point, right? Where it's like you have the gig economy existed prior to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, it actually blew up as a result of the pandemic because people were starting to fill in very innovative ways in order to offset certain things. And the Forbes article goes on to say that post-pandemic, they feel like the gig economy will exit probably more strongly than it's ever has been because of the thought of job flexibility being more appealing, potentially more necessary remote work happening, and that being like now table stakes as a result of the pandemic, where once again, everything got leveled off, and there's a renaissance of what employment should look like, or can look like now that companies can support remote work as a result of the pandemic. So it'll be really interesting to see what the post-blast will look like. In that vein, Jody, I have a question for you. Let's speculate on post-pandemic. What do you think will happen? Do you think we'll just come back with full force, even more innovative and entrepreneur at heart? Or do you think it'll just kind of be the same old, same old? I feel like it's the former than the latter. I think people will just come back with such aggressive entrepreneurial spirit, trying to get back into the mix.
I think there's an opportunity because everything's going to be so different that you're going to have to figure out what different looks like and what is needed because of different, right? So like, think about the mask industry, right? Like before the pandemic, nobody needed a mask, who wore a mask, right? And so that went crazy, right? So even as we go back and we open the office or whatever that looks like, I mean, plexiglass, right? Who sold plexiglass before, right? So I think there's going to be all these needs that people are going to have to figure out new ways. They're going to have to invent something or figure something out to solve these problems that have now been created by the pandemic. And that's where the innovation is going to come from, because good innovation comes from real problems. So whatever these real problems are that the pandemic has created is where the innovation is going to happen. And that's where it's going to grow. And, even think COVID testing. What was COVID testing before? Now, like there's a whole business around COVID testing. So that's the cool stuff, right? That's going to be where the rebirth in the economy comes from. And I think people are smart, and I think people will figure it out. And the people who are innovative will figure those things out, and they'll start companies. And then the worker bees will just work for those new companies because they're worker bees.
I love it. Great quote. Great innovation comes from real problems. Jody. Thank you so much. For everyone that's watching, how can they follow you? How can they buy your books? How can they learn and stay more in tune with the incredible Jody Padar?
So really just connect to me on LinkedIn. Just Jody Padar, friend me on LinkedIn, follow me. I'm like everywhere. So shouldn't be too hard. If you Google me or the Radical CPA, I'm sure you'll find me.
Awesome. You follow her, I'm sure, on Twitter, LinkedIn, all those fun spots. Are you doing any clubhouses? I'm kind of curious now.
So I am part of the official accounting and technology clubhouse that Salon Angel started from Mindbridge. And I've been to Clubhouse a couple of times. I still haven't quite figured out the business purpose of it yet, other than it's like a big conference call. So I don't know. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe I'll figure out what the value prop is. But to me, it's still kind of, haphazard. And someone will figure it out, but I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, I'm sure that someone will be you. Hey, Jody, thank you so much for your time. I mean, great perspectives. You're absolutely right with a lot that you say, and just really honored to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Caleb, lots to think about. I mean, I wish I had my notepad in front of me, because there was just a lot of things that Jody was saying that were like just great quotes. And I'm really trying hard to remember the one that's like, great innovation comes from real problems. But yeah, I think the entrepreneur spirit is alive and well is pretty much the takeaway here.
I think she's right about it. It will take some time for the real innovation to happen. But in the meantime, people seem to be seem to be making the best out of a bad situation, and in a very short period of time, I think we'll start to see some cool things emerge. So yeah, I agree that it's going to be it's an interesting thing to watch.
Well, making the best of a bummer is a great thing. Take us home, Caleb.
All right. This edition of On the Margins Live was written and produced by Will Lopez and myself. Our co-producers are Mohini Kundu and Andrea Garcia Vargas. Video and sound production by Waylon Janowick and Rylan Harris. Graphic design by Paul Choi. Special thanks to our colleague Pavni Tadikola, who recently left Gusto. We'll miss you, Pav. Our next show will be on April 27th with our guest Greg Kite. Until then, I'll be doing deadlifts out on the margins. Okay.